The Mahabharata of Krishna-Dwaipayana Vyasa. Translated into English prose from the original Sanskrit text by Pratap Chandra Roy C.I.E. This free ebook has been downloaded from holybooks.com. Vana Parva. Section 271, Draupadi Harana Parva continued. Janamejaya said, "What did those tigers among men, the Pandavas, do, after they had suffered such misery in consequence of the ravishment of Draupadi?" Vaisampayana said, "Having defeated Jayadratha and rescued Krishna, the virtuous king Yudhishthira took his seat by the side of that best of Munis. And among those foremost of ascetics who were expressing their grief upon bearing Draupadi's misfortune, Yudhishthira, the son of Pandu, addressed Markandeya, saying, 'O adorable sire, amongst the gods and the ascetics, thou art known to have the fullest knowledge of both the past as well as the future. A doubt existeth in my mind, which I would ask thee to solve. This lady is the daughter of Drupada, she hath issued from the sacrificial altar and hath not been begotten of the flesh, and she is highly blessed and is also the daughter-in-law of the illustrious Pandu. I incline to think that time, and human destiny that dependeth on our acts, and the inevitable, are irresistible in respect of creatures. If it were not so, how could such a misfortune afflict this wife of ours so faithful and virtuous, like a false accusation of theft against an honest man? The daughter of Drupada hath never committed any sinful act, nor hath she done anything that is not commendable, on the contrary, she hath assiduously practiced the highest virtues towards Brahmanas. And yet the foolish king Jayadratha had carried her away by force. In consequence of this act of violence on her, that sinful wretch hath his hair shaved off his head and sustained also, with all his allies, defeat in battle. It is true we have rescued her after slaughtering the troops of Sindhu. But the disgrace of this ravishment of our wife during our hours of carelessness hath stained us, to be sure. This life in the wilderness is full of miseries. We subsist by chase, and though dwelling in the woods, we are obliged to slay the denizens thereof that live with us. This exile also that we suffer is due to the act of deceitful kinsmen. Is there any one who is more unfortunate than I am? Hast thou ever seen or heard of such a one before?" Thus ends the 271st section in the Draupadi Harana Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 272, Draupadi Harana Parva continued. Markandeya said, "O bull of the Bharata race, even Rama suffered unparalleled misery, for the evil-minded Ravana, king of the Rakshasas, having recourse to deceit and overpowering the vulture Jatayu, forcibly carried away his wife Sita from his asylum in the woods. Indeed, Rama, with the help of Sugriva, brought her back, constructing a bridge across the sea, and consuming Lanka with his keen-edged arrows." Yudhishthira said, "In what race was Rama born, and what was the measure of his might and prowess? Whose son also was Ravana, and for what was it that he had any misunderstanding with Rama? It behoveth thee, O illustrious one, to tell me all this in detail, for I long to hear the story of Rama of great achievements." Markandeya said, "Listen, prince of Bharata's race, to this old history exactly as it happened. I will tell thee all about the distress suffered by Rama together with his wife. There was a great king named Aja, sprung from the race of Ikshvaku. He had a son named Dasaratha who was devoted to the study of the Vedas and was ever pure. And Dasaratha had 4 sons conversant with morality and profit, known by the names, respectively, of Rama, Lakshmana, Satrughna, and the mighty Bharata. And Rama had for his mother Kausalya, and Bharata had for his mother Kaikeyi, while those scourge of their enemies Lakshmana and Satrughna, were the sons of Sumitra. And Janaka was the king of Vaidha, and Sita was his daughter. And Tashtri himself created her, desiring to make her the beloved wife of Rama. I have now told thee the history of both Rama's and Sita's birth. And now, king, I will relate unto thee birth of Ravana. That lord of all creatures and the creator of the universe was, the self-create Prajapati, himself that god possessed of great ascetic merit, is the grandfather of Ravana. And Pulastya had her mighty son called Vaisravana begotten of a cow. But his son, leaving his father, went to his grandfather. And, king, angered at this, his father then created a second self of himself. And with half of his own self that regenerate one became born of Visrava for wreaking a vengeance on Vaisravana. But the grandsire, pleased with Vaisravana, gave him immortality, and sovereignty of all the wealth of the universe, the guardianship of one of the cardinal points, the friendship of Vizana, and a son named Nalakuvara. And he also gave him for his capital Lanka, which was guarded by hosts of Rakshasas, and also a chariot called Pushpaka capable of going everywhere according to the will of the rider. And the kingship of the Yakshas and the sovereignty over sovereigns were also his. Thus ends the 272nd section in the Draupadi Harana Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 273, Draupadi Harana Parva continued. Markandeya said, the Muni named Visrava, who was begotten of half the soul of Pulastya, in a fit of passion, began to look upon Vaisravana with great anger. But monarch, Kuvara the king of the Rakshasas, knowing that his father was angry with him, always sought to please him. And, best of Bharata's race, that king of kings living in Lanka, and born upon the shoulders of men, sent 3 Rakshasa women to wait upon his father. Their names, king, were Pushpotkata, Raka and Malini. And they were skilled in singing and dancing and were always assiduous in their attentions on that high-souled rishi, and those slender-waisted ladies vied with one another, O king, in gratifying the rishi. And that high-souled and adorable being was pleased with them and granted them boons. And to every one of them he gave princely sons according to their desire. 2 sons, those foremost of Rakshasas named Kumbhakarna and the 10-headed Ravana, both unequalled on earth in prowess, were born to Pushpotkata. And Malini had a son named Vibhishana, and Raka had twin children named Kara and Sarpanaka. And Vibhishana surpassed them all in beauty. And that excellent person was very pious and assiduously performed all religious rites. But that foremost of Rakshasas, with 10 heads, was the eldest to them all. And he was religious and energetic and possessed of great strength and prowess, and the Rakshasa Kumbhakarna was the most powerful in battle, for he was fierce and terrible and a thorough master of the arts of illusion. And Kara was proficient in archery, and hostile to the Brahmanas, subsisting as he did on flesh. And the fierce Sarpanaka was constant source of trouble to the ascetics. And the warriors, learned in the Veds and diligent in ceremonial rites, all lived with their father in the Gandhamadana. And there they beheld Vaisravana seated with their father, possessed of riches and borne on the shoulders of men. And seized with jealousy, they resolved upon performing penances. And with ascetic penances of the most severe kind, they gratified Brahma. And the 10-headed Ravana, supporting life by means of air alone and surrounded by the 5 sacred fires and absorbed in meditation, remained standing on one leg for 1,000 years. And Kumbhakarna with head downwards, and with restricted diet, was constant in austerities. And the wise and magnanimous Vibhishana, observing fasts and subsisting only on dry leaves and engaged in meditation, practiced severe austerities for a long period. And Kara and Sarpanaka, with cheerful hearts, protected and attended on them while they were performing those austerities. And at the close of 1,000 years, the invincible 10-headed one, cutting off his own heads, offered them as offering to the sacred fire. And at this act of his, the Lord of the universe was pleased with him. And then Brahma, personally appearing to them, bade them desist from those austerities and promised to grant boons unto every one of them. And the adorable Brahma said, I am pleased with you, my sons. Cease now from these austerities and ask boons of me. Whatever your desires may be, they, with the single exception of that of immortality, will be fulfilled. As thou hast offered thy heads to the fire from great ambition, they will again adorn thy body as before, according to thy desire. And thy body will not be disfigured, and thou shalt be able to assume any form according to thy desire and become the conqueror of thy foes in battle. There is no doubt of this. Thereupon Ravana said, May I never experience defeat at the hands of Gandharvas, Celestials, Kinnaras, Asuras, Yakshas, Rakshasas, serpents and all other creatures. Brahma said, From those that hast named, thou shalt never have cause of fear, except from men thou shalt have no occasion for fear. Good betide thee. So hath it been ordained by me. Markandeya said, thus addressed, the ten-headed Ravana was highly gratified, for on account of his perverted understanding, the man-eating one slightened human beings. Then the great-grandsire addressed Kumbhakarna as before. His reason being clouded by darkness, he asked for long-lasting sleep, saying, It shall be so. Brahma then addressed Vibhishana, O my son, I am much pleased with thee. Ask any boon thou pleasest. Thereupon, Vibhishana replied, Even in great danger, may I never swerve from the path of righteousness, and though ignorant, may I, adorable sire, be illumined with the light of divine knowledge. And Brahma replied, O scourge of thy enemies, as thy soul inclines not to unrighteousness although born in the Rakshasa race, I grant thee immortality. Markandeya continued, having obtained this boon, the ten-headed Rakshasa defeated Kuvara in battle and obtained from him the sovereignty of Lanka. That adorable being, leaving Lanka and followed by Gandharvas, Yakshas, Rakshas, and Kinnaras, went to live on Mount Gandhamadana. And Ravana forcibly took from him the celestial chariot Pushpaka. And upon this wise Ravana cursed him, saying, This chariot shall never carry thee, it shall bear him who will slay thee in battle. And as thou hast insulted me, thy elder brother, thou shalt soon die. The pious Vibhishana, king, treading in the path followed by the virtuous and possessed of great glory, followed Kuvara. That adorable lord of wealth, highly pleased with his younger brothers, invested him with the command of the Yaksha and Raksha hosts. On the other hand, the powerful and man-eating Rakshasas and Pisachas, having assembled together, invested the ten-headed Ravana with their sovereignty. And Ravana, capable of assuming any form at will and terrible in prowess, and capable also of passing through the air, attacked the gods and the Daityas and wrested from them all their valuable possessions. And as he had terrified all creatures, he was called Ravana. And Ravana, capable of mustering any measure of might, inspired the very gods with terror. Thus ends the 273rd section in the Draupadi Harana Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 274, Draupadi Harana Parva continued. Markandeya said, Then the Brahmarshis, the Siddhas and the Devarshis, with Havyavaha as their spokesman, sought the protection of Brahma. And Agni said, That powerful son of Visrava, the ten-headed, cannot be slain on account of thy boon. Endued with great might he oppresseth in every possible way the creatures of the earth. Protect us therefore, adorable one. There is none else save thee to protect us. Brahma said, O Agni, he cannot be conquered in battle by either the gods or the Asuras. I have already ordained that which is needful for that purpose. Indeed his death is near. Urged by me, the four-headed god hath already been incarnate for that object. Even Vishnu, that foremost of smiters, will achieve that object. Markandeya continued, then the grandsire also asked Sakra, in their presence, be thou with all the celestials born on earth, and beget ye on monkeys and bears, heroic sons possessed of great strength and capable of assuming any form at will as allies of Vishnu. And at this, the gods, the Gandharvas and the Danavas quickly assembled to take counsel as to how they should be born on earth according to their respective parts. And in their presence the boon-giving god commanded a Gandharvi, by name Dandabi, saying, go therefore accomplishing this object. And Dandabi, hearing these words of the grandsire, was born in the world of men as the hunchbacked Manthara. And all the principal celestials, with Sakra and others, begot offspring upon the wives of the foremost of monkeys and bears. And those sons equalled their sires in strength and fame. And they were capable of splitting mountain peaks, and their weapons were stones and trees of the Sola and the Tola species. And their bodies were hard as adamant, and they were possessed of very great strength. And they were all skilled in war and capable of mustering any measure of energy at will. And they were equal to 1,000 elephants in might, and they resembled the wind in speed. And some of them lived wherever they liked, while others lived in forests. And the adorable Creator of the universe, having ordained all this, instructed Manthara as to what she would have to do. And Manthara, quick as thought, understood all his words, and went hither and thither, ever engaged in fermenting quarrels. Thus ends the 274th section in the Draupadi Harana Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 275, Draupadi Harana Parva continued. Yudhishthira said, O adorable one, thou hast described to me in detail the history of the birth of Rama and others. I wish to learn the cause of their exile. Do thou, O Brahmana, relate why the sons of Dasaratha, the brothers Rama and Lakshmana, went to the forest with famous princess of Mithila. Markandeya said, the pious king Dasaratha, ever mindful of the old and assiduous in religious ceremonies, was greatly pleased when these sons were born. And his sons gradually grew up in might, and they became conversant with the Veds together with all their mysteries, and with the science of arms. And when after having gone through the Brahmacharya vows the princes were married, King Dasaratha became happy and highly pleased. And the intelligent Rama, the eldest of them all, became the favorite of his father, and greatly pleased the people with his charming ways. And then Bharata, the wise king, considering himself old in years, took counsel with his virtuous ministers and spiritual advisor for installing Rama as regent of the kingdom. And all those great ministers were agreed that it was time to do so. And, O scion of Kuru's race, King Dasaratha was greatly pleased to behold his son, that enhancer of Kausalya's delight, possessed of eyes that were red, and arms that were sinewy. And his steps were like those of a wild elephant. And he had long arms and high shoulders, and black and curly hair. And he was valiant, and glowing with splendor, and not inferior to Indra himself in battle. And he was well versed in holy writ, and was equal to Vrihaspati in wisdom. An object of love with all the people, he was skilled in every science. And with senses under complete control, his very enemies were pleased to behold him. And he was terror of the wicked and the protector of the virtuous. And possessed of intelligence and incapable of being baffled, he was victorious over all and never vanquished by any. And, O descendant of Kurus, beholding his son, that enhancer of Kausalya's joy, King Dasaratha became highly pleased. And reflecting on Rama's virtues, the powerful and mighty king cheerfully addressed the family priest, saying, Blessed be thou, Brahmana. This night of the Pushya constellation will bring in a very auspicious conjunction. Let therefore materials be collected, and let Rama also be invited. This Pushya constellation will last till tomorrow. And Rama therefore should be invested by me and my ministers as Prince Regent of all my subjects. Meanwhile Manthara, the maid of Kaikeyi, hearing these words of the king, went to her mistress, and spoke unto her as was suited to the occasion. And she said, Thy great ill luck, O C.I.E., hath this day been proclaimed by the king. Unlucky one, mayst thou be bitten by a fierce and enraged snake of virulent poison. Kausalya, indeed, is fortunate, as it is her son that is going to be installed on the throne. Where indeed is thy prosperity, when thy son obtaineth not the kingdom? Hearing these words of her maid, the slender-waisted and beautiful C.I.E. put on all her ornaments, and sought her husband in a secluded place. And with a joyous heart, and smiling pleasantly, she addressed these words to him with all the blandishments of love. O king, thou art always true to thy promises. Thou didst promise before to grant me an object of my desire. Do thou fulfill that promise now and save thyself from the sin of unredeemed pledge. The king replied, saying, I will grant thee a boon. Ask thou whatever thou wishest. What man undeserving of death shall be slain today, and who that deserves death is to be set at liberty? Upon whom shall I bestow wealth today, or whose wealth shall be confiscated? Whatever wealth there is in this world, save what belongeth to Brahmanas, is mine. I am the king of kings in this world, and the protector of all the four classes. Tell me quickly, O blessed lady, what that object is upon which thou hast set thy heart. Hearing these words of the king, and tying him fast to his pledge, and conscious also of her power over him, she addressed him in these words, I desire that Bharata be the recipient of that investiture which thou hast designed for Rama. And let Rama go into exile, living in the forest of Dandaka for 14 years as an ascetic, with matted locks on head, and robed in rags and deer skins. Hearing these disagreeable words of cruel import, the king, chief of the Bharata race, was sorely afflicted and became utterly speechless. But the mighty and virtuous Rama, learning that his father had been thus solicited, went into the forest so that the king's truth might remain inviolate. And, blessed be thou, he was followed by the auspicious Lakshmana, that foremost of bowmen, and his wife Sita, the princess of Vaidha and daughter of Janaka. And after Rama had gone into the forest, King Dasaratha took leave of his body, agreeably to the eternal law of time. And knowing that Rama not near and that the king was dead, Queen C.I.E., causing Bharata to be brought before her, addressed him in these words, Dasaratha hath gone to heaven, and both Rama and Lakshmana are in the forest. Take thou this kingdom which is so extensive, and whose peace there is no rival to disturb. Thereupon the virtuous Bharata replied unto her, saying, Thou hast done a wicked deed, having slain thy husband and exterminated this family from lust of wealth alone. Heaping infamy on my head, O accursed woman of our race, thou hast, O mother, attained this, thy object. And having said these words, the prince wept aloud. And having proved his innocence before all the subjects of that realm, he set out in the wake of Rama, desiring to bring him back. And placing Kausalya and Sumitra and C.I.E. in the vehicles at the van of his train, he proceeded with a heavy heart, in company with Satrughna. And he was accompanied by Vasishtha and Vamadeva, and other Brahmanas by thousands, and by the people of the cities and the provinces, desiring to bring back Rama. And he saw Rama with Lakshmana, living on the mountains of Chitrakuta with bow in hand and decked with the ornaments of ascetics. Bharata, however, was dismissed by Rama, who was determined to act according to the words of his father. And returning, Bharata ruled at Nandigrama, keeping before him his brother's wooden sandals. And Rama, fearing a repetition of intrusion by the people of Ayodhya, entered into the great forest towards the asylum of Sarabanga. And having paid his respects to Sarabanga, he entered the forest of Dandaka and took up his abode on the banks of beautiful river Godavari. And while living there, Rama was inveigled into hostilities with Kara, then dwelling in Janasthana, on account of Sarpanaka. And for the protection of the ascetics, the virtuous scion of Raghu's race slew 14,000 Rakshasas on earth, and having slain those mighty Rakshasas, Kara and Dushana, the wise descendant of Raghu once more made that sacred forest free from danger. And after these Rakshasas had been slain, Surpanaka with mutilated nose and lips, repaired to Lanka, the abode of her brother Ravana. And when that Rakshasa woman, senseless with grief and with dry blood stains on her face, appeared before Ravana, she fell down at his feet. And beholding her so horribly mutilated, Ravana became senseless with wrath, and grinding his teeth sprung up from his seat. And dismissing his ministers, he inquired of her in private, saying, "Blessed sister, who hath made thee so, forgetting and disregarding me? Who is he that having got a sharp-pointed spear hath rubbed his body with it? Who is he that sleepeth in happiness and security, after placing a fire close to his head? Who is he that hath trodden upon a revengeful snake of virulent poison? Who indeed is that person who standeth with his hand thrust into the mouth of the maned lion?" Then flames of wrath burst forth from his body, like those that are emitted at night from the hollows of a tree on fire. His sister then related unto him the prowess of Rama and the defeat of the Rakshasas with Kara and Dushana at their head. Informed of the slaughter of his relatives, Ravana, impelled by fate, remembered Maricha for slaying Rama. And resolving upon the course he was to follow, and having made arrangements for the government of his capital, he consoled his sister, and set out on an aerial voyage. And crossing the Trikutta and the Kala mountains, he beheld the vast receptacle of deep waters, the abode of the Makaras. Then crossing the ocean, the 10-headed Ravana reached Gokarna, the favorite resort of the illustrious god armed with the trident. And there Ravana met with his old friend Maricha, who from fear of Rama himself had adopted an ascetic mode of life. Thus ends the 275th section in the Draupadi Harana Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 276, Draupadi Harana Parva continued. Markandeya said, beholding Ravana come, Maricha received him with a respectful welcome, and offered him fruits and roots. And after Ravana had taken his seat, and rested himself a while, Maricha, skilled in speech, sat beside Ravana and addressed him, who was himself as eloquent in speech, saying, "Thy complexion hath assumed an unnatural hue. Is it all right with thy kingdom, king of the Rakshasas? What hath brought thee here? Do thy subjects continue to pay thee the same allegiance that they used to pay thee before? What business hath brought thee here? Know that it is already fulfilled, even if it be very difficult of fulfillment." Ravana, whose heart was agitated with wrath and humiliation, informed him briefly of the acts of Rama and the measures that were to be taken. And on hearing his story, Maricha briefly replied to him, saying, "Thou must not provoke Rama, for I know his strength. Is there a person who is capable of withstanding the impetus of his arrows? That great man hath been the cause of my assuming my present ascetic life. What evil-minded creature hath put thee up to this course calculated to bring ruin and destruction on thee?" To this Ravana indignantly replied, reproaching him thus, "If thou dost not obey my orders, thou shalt surely die at my hands." Maricha then thought within himself, "When death is inevitable, I shall do his biddings, for it is better to die at the hands of one that is superior." Then he replied to the Lord of the Rakshasas, saying, "I shall surely render thee whatever help I can." Then the 10-headed Ravana said unto him, "Go and tempt Sita, assuming the shape of a deer with golden horns and a golden skin. When Sita will observe thee thus, she will surely send away Rama to hunt thee. And then Sita will surely come within my power, and I shall forcibly carry her away. And then that wicked Rama will surely die of grief at the loss of his wife. Do thou help me in this way." Thus addressed, Maricha performed his obsequies in anticipation and with a sorrowful heart, followed Ravana who was in advance of him. And having reached the hermitage of Rama of difficult achievements, they both did as arranged beforehand. And Ravana appeared in the guise of an ascetic with head shaven, and adorned with a kamandala, and a treble staff. And Marich appeared in the shape of a deer. And Marich appeared before the princess of Vaidha in that guise. And impelled by fate, she sent away Rama after that deer. And Rama, with the object of pleasing her, quickly took up his bow, and leaving Lakshmana behind to protect her, went in pursuit of that deer. And armed with his bow and quiver and scimitar, and his fingers encased in gloves of guana skin, Rama went in pursuit of that deer, after the manner of Bhadra following the stellar deer in days of yore. And that Rakshasa enticed away Rama to a great distance by appearing before him at one time and disappearing from his view at another. And when Rama at last knew who and what that deer was, viz., that he was a Rakshasa, that illustrious descendant of Bagh whose race took out an infallible arrow and slew that Rakshasa, in the disguise of a deer. And struck with Rama's arrow, the Rakshasa, imitating Rama's voice, cried out in great distress, calling upon Sita and Lakshmana. And when the princess of Vaidha heard that cry of distress, she urged Lakshmana to run towards the quarter from whence the cry came. Then Lakshmana said to her, "Timid lady, thou hast no cause of fear. Who is so powerful as to be able to smite Rama? Thou of sweet smiles, in a moment thou wilt behold thy husband Rama." Thus addressed, the chaste Sita, from that timidity which is natural to women, became suspicious of even the pure Lakshmana, and began to weep aloud. And that chaste lady, devoted to her husband, harshly reproved Lakshmana, saying, "The object which thou, O fool, cherishest in thy heart, shall never be fulfilled. I would rather kill myself with a weapon or throw myself from the top of a hill or enter into a blazing fire than live with a sorry wretch like thee, forsaking my husband Rama, like a tigress under the protection of a jackal." When the good-natured Lakshmana, who was very fond of his brother, heard these words, he shut his ears with his hands and set out on the track that Rama had taken. And Lakshmana set out without casting a single glance on that lady with lips soft and red like the bimba fruit. Meanwhile, the Rakshasa Ravana, wearing a genteel guise though wicked at heart, and like unto fire enveloped in a heap of ashes, showed himself there. And he appeared there in the disguise of a hermit, for forcibly carrying away that lady of blameless character. The virtuous daughter of Janaka, seeing him come, welcomed him with fruits and roots and a seat. Disregarding these and assuming his own proper shape, that bull among Rakshasas began to reassure the princess of Vaidha in these words, "I am, O Sita, the king of the Rakshasas, known by the name of Ravana. My delightful city, known by the name of Lanka, is on the other side of the great ocean. There among beautiful women, thou wilt shine with me. O lady of beautiful lips, forsaking the ascetic Rama, do thou become my wife." Janaka's daughter of beautiful lips, hearing these and other words in the same strain, shut her ears and replied unto him, saying, "Do not say so. The vault of heaven with all its stars may fall down, the earth itself may be broken into fragments, fire itself may change its nature by becoming cool, yet I cannot forsake the descendant of Raghu. How can a she-elephant, who had lived with the mighty leader of a herd with rent temples, forsake him and live with a hog? Having once tasted the sweet wine prepared from honey or flowers, how can a woman, I fancy, relish the rich arrack from rice?" Having uttered those words, she entered the cottage, her lips trembling in wrath and her arms moving to and fro in emotion. Ravana, however, followed her thither and intercepted her further progress. And rudely scolded by the Rakshasa, she swooned away. But Ravana seized her by the hair of her head, and rose up into the air. Then a huge vulture of the name of Jatayu, living on a mountain peak, beheld that helpless lady thus weeping and calling upon Rama in great distress while being carried away by Ravana. Thus ends the 276th section in the Draupadi Harana Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 277, Draupadi Harana Parva continued. Markandeya said, that heroic king of the vultures, Jatayu, having sympathy for his uterine brother and Arjuna himself for his father, was a friend of Dasaratha. And beholding his daughter-in-law Sita on the lap of Ravana, that ranger of the skies rushed in wrath against the king of the Rakshasas. And the vulture addressed Ravana, saying, leave the princess of Mithila, leave her I say. How canst thou, O Rakshasa, ravish her when I am alive? If thou dost not release my daughter-in-law, thou shalt not escape from me with life. And having said these words, Jatayu began to tear the king of the Rakshasas with his talons. And he mangled him in 100 different parts of his body by striking him with his wings and beaks. And blood began to flow as copiously from Ravana's body as water from a mountain spring. And attacked thus by that vulture desirous of Rama's good, Ravana, taking up a sword, cut off the 2 wings of that bird. And having slain that king of the vultures, huge as some mountain peak shooting forth above the clouds, the Rakshasa rose high in the air with Sita on his lap. And the princess of Vaidha, wherever she saw an asylum of ascetics, a lake, a river, or a tank, threw down an ornament of hers. And beholding on the top of a mountain 5 foremost of monkeys, that intelligent lady threw down amongst them a broad piece of her costly attire. And that beautiful and yellow piece of cloth fell, fluttering through the air, amongst those 5 foremost of monkeys like lightning from the clouds. And that Rakshasa soon passed a great way through the firmament like a bird through the air. And soon the Rakshasa beheld his delightful and charming city of many gates, surrounded on all sides by high walls and built by Viswakrit himself. And the king of the Rakshasa then entered his own city known by the name of Lanka, accompanied by Sita, and while Sita was being carried away, the intelligent Rama, having slain the great deer, retraced his steps and saw his brother Lakshmana on the way. And beholding his brother, Rama reproved him, saying, how couldst thou come hither, leaving the princess of Vaidha in a forest that is haunted by the Rakshasa? And reflecting on his own enticement to a great distance by that Rakshasa in the guise of a deer, and on the arrival of his brother leaving Sita alone in the asylum, Rama was filled with agony. And quickly advancing towards Lakshmana while reproving him still, Rama asked him, O Lakshmana, is the princess of Vaidha still alive? I fear she is no more. Then Lakshmana told him everything about what Sita had said, especially that unbecoming language of hers subsequently. With a burning heart Rama then ran towards the asylum. And on the way he beheld a vulture huge as a mountain, lying in agonies of death. And suspecting him to be a Rakshasa, the descendant of the Kakutstha race, along with Lakshmana rushed towards him, drawing with great force his bow to a circle. The mighty vulture, however, addressing them both, said, Blessed be ye, I am the king of the vultures, and friend of Dasaratha. Hearing these words of his, both Rama and his brother put aside their excellent bow and said, Who is this one that speaketh the name of our father in these woods? And then they saw that creature to be a bird destitute of 2 wings, and that bird then told them of his own overthrow at the hands of Ravana for the sake of Sita. Then Rama inquired of the vulture as to the way Ravana had taken. The vulture answered him by a nod of his head and then breathed his last. And having understood from the sign the vulture had made that Ravana had gone towards the south, Rama, reverencing his father's friend, caused his funeral obsequies to be duly performed. Then those chastisers of foes, Rama and Lakshmana, filled with grief at the abduction of the princess of Vaidha, took a southern path through the Dandaka woods, beholding along their way many uninhabited asylums of ascetics, scattered over with seats of kusa grass and umbrellas of leaves and broken water pots, and abounding with hundreds of jackals. And in that great forest, Rama along with Sumitra's son beheld many herds of deer running in all directions. And they heard a loud uproar of various creatures like what is heard during a fast-spreading forest conflagration. And soon they beheld a headless Rakshasa of terrible mien. And that Rakshasa was dark as the clouds and huge as a mountain, with shoulders broad as those of a sala tree, and with arms that were gigantic. And he had a pair of large eyes on his breast, and the opening of his mouth was placed on his capacious belly. And that Rakshasa seized Lakshmana by the hand, without any difficulty. And seized by the Rakshasa the son of Sumitra, O Bharata, became utterly confounded and helpless. And casting his glances on Rama, that headless Rakshasa began to draw Lakshmana towards that part of his body where his mouth was. And Lakshmana in grief addressed Rama, saying, "Behold my plight. The loss of thy kingdom, and then the death of our father, and then the abduction of Sita, and finally this disaster that hath overwhelmed me. Alas, I shall not behold thee return with the princess of Vaidha to Kosala and seated on thy ancestral throne as the ruler of the entire earth. They only that are fortunate will behold thy face, like unto the moon emerged from the clouds, after thy coronation bath in waters sanctified with kusa grass and fried paddy and black peas." And the intelligent Lakshmana uttered those and other lamentations in the same strain. The illustrious descendant, however, of Kakutstha's race undaunted amid danger, replied unto Lakshmana, saying, "Do not, O tiger among men, give way to grief. What is this thing when I am here? Cut thou off his right arm and I shall cut off his left." And while Rama was still speaking so, the left arm of the monster was severed by him, cut off with a sharp scimitar, as if indeed, that arm were a stalk of the Thilakon. The mighty son of Sumitra then beholding his brother standing before him struck off with his sword the right arm also of that Rakshasa. And Lakshmana also began to repeatedly strike Rakshasa under the ribs, and then that huge headless monster fell upon the ground and expired quickly. And then there came out from the Rakshasa's body a person of celestial make. And he showed himself to the brothers, staying for a moment in the skies, like the sun in his effulgence in the firmament. And Rama, skilled in speech, asked him, saying, "Who art thou? Answer me who inquire of thee. Whence could such a thing happen? All this seems to me to be exceedingly wonderful." Thus addressed by Rama, that being replied unto him, saying, "I am, O Prince, a Gandharva of the name of Viswabesu. It was through the curse of a Brahmana that I had to assume the form and nature of a Raksha. As to thyself, O Rama, Sita hath been carried away with violence by King Ravana who dwelleth in Lanka. Repair thou unto Sugriva who will give thee his friendship. There, near enough to the peak of Rishyamukha is the lake known by the name of Pampa of sacred water and cranes. There dwelleth, with 4 of his counsellors, Sugriva, the brother of the monkey king Vali decked with a garland of gold. Repairing unto him, in form of thy cause of sorrow, in plight very much like thy own, he will render thee assistance. This is all that we can say. Thou wilt, without doubt, see the daughter of Janaka. Without doubt Ravana and others are known to the king of the monkeys." Having said these words, that celestial being of great effulgence made himself invisible, and those heroes, both Rama and Lakshmana, wondered much. Thus ends the 277th section in the Draupadi Harana Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 278, Draupadi Parana Parva continued. Markandeya said, afflicted with grief at the abduction of Sita, Rama had not to go much further before he came upon Pampa, that lake which abounded with lotuses of various kinds. And fanned by the cool, delicious and fragrant breezes in those woods, Rama suddenly remembered his dear spouse. And, O mighty monarch, thinking of that dear wife of his, and afflicted at the thought of his separation from her, Rama gave way to lamentations. The son of Sumitra then addressed him, saying, O thou that givest proper respect to those that deserve it, despondency such as this should not be suffered to approach thee, like illness that can never touch an old man leading a regular life. Thou hast obtained information of Ravana and of the princess of Vaidha. Liberate her now with exertion and intelligence. Let us now approach Sugriva, that foremost of monkeys, who is even now on the mountain top. Console thyself, when I, thy disciple and slave and ally, am near. If and addressed by Lakshmana in these and other words of the same import, Rama regained his own nature and attended to the business before him. And bathing in the waters of Pampa and offering oblations therewith unto their ancestors, both those heroic brothers, Rama and Lakshmana, set out for Rishyamukha. And arriving at Rishyamukha, which abounded with fruits and roots and trees, those heroes beheld 5 monkeys on the top of the mountain peak. And seeing them approach, Sugriva sent his counselor the intelligent Hanuman, huge as the Himavat mountains, to receive them. And the brothers, having first exchanged words with Hanuman, approached Sugriva. And then, O king, Rama made friends with Sugriva. And when Rama informed Sugriva of the object he had in view, Sugriva showed him the piece of cloth that Sita had dropped among the monkeys, while being carried away by Ravana. And having obtained from him those credentials, Rama himself installed Sugriva, that foremost of monkeys, in sovereignty of all the monkeys of earth. And Rama also pledged himself to slay Vali in battle. And having come to that understanding and placing the fullest confidence in each other, they all repaired to Kiskindya, desirous of battle with Vali. And arriving at Kiskindya, Sugriva sent forth a loud roar deep as that of a cataract. Unable to bear that challenge, Vali was for coming out, but his wife Tara stood in the way, saying, himself endued with great strength, the way in which Sugriva is roaring, showeth, I ween, that he hath found assistance. It behoveth thee not therefore to go out. Thus addressed by her, that king of the monkeys, the eloquent Vali, decked in a golden garland, replied unto Tara, of face beautiful as the moon, saying, Thou understandest the voice of every creature. Tell me after reflection whose help it is that this brother in name only of mine hath obtained. Thus addressed by him, Tara, endued with wisdom and possessed of the effulgence of the moon, answered her lord after a moment's reflection, saying, Listen, O monarch of the monkeys. That foremost of bowmen, endued with great might, Rama the son of Dasaratha, whose spouse hath been ravished, hath made an alliance offensive and defensive with Sugriva. And his brother the intelligent Lakshmana also of mighty arms, the unvanquished son of Sumitra, standeth beside him for the success of Sugriva's object. And Menda and Dvivida, and Hanuman the son of Pavana, and Jamvuman, the king of the bears, are beside Sugriva as his counselors. All these illustrious ones are endued with great strength and intelligence. And these all, depending upon the might and energy of Rama, are prepared for thy destruction. Hearing these words of hers that were for his benefit, the king of the monkeys disregarded them altogether. And filled with jealousy, he also suspected her to have set her heart on Sugriva. And addressing Tara in harsh words, he went out of his cave, and coming before Sugriva, who was staying by the side of the mountains of Malyavat, he spoke unto him thus, Frequently vanquished before by me, fond as thou art of life, thou art allowed by me to escape with life owing to thy relationship with me. What hath made thee wish for death so soon? Thus addressed by Vali, Sugriva, that slayer of foes, as if addressing Rama himself for informing him of what had happened, replied unto his brother in these words of grave import, O king, robbed by thee of my wife and my kingdom also, what need have I of life? Know that it is for this that I have come. Then addressing each other in these and other words of the same import, Vali and Sugriva rushed to the encounter, fighting with Sala and Thala trees and stones. And they struck each other down on the earth. And leaping high into the air, they struck each other with their fists. And mangled by each other's nail and teeth, both of them were covered with blood. And the two heroes shone on that account like a pair of blossoming kinshukas. And as they fought with each other, no difference in aspect could be observed so as to distinguish them. Then Hanuman placed on Sugriva's neck a garland of flowers. And that hero thereupon shone with that garland on his neck, like the beautiful and huge peak of Malya with its cloudy belt. And Rama, recognizing Sugriva by that sign, then drew his foremost of huge bows, aiming at Vali as his mark. And the twang of Rama's bow resembled the roar of an engine. And Vali, pierced in the heart by that arrow, trembled in fear. And Vali, his heart having been pierced through, began to vomit forth blood. And he then beheld standing before him Rama with Sumitra's son by his side. And reproving that descendant of Kakutstha's race, Vali fell down on the ground and became senseless. And Tara then beheld that lord of hers possessed of the effulgence of the moon, lying prostrate on the bare earth. And after Vali had been thus slain, Sugriva regained possession of Kishkindia, and along with it, of the widowed Tara also of face beautiful as the moon. And the intelligent Rama also dwelt on the beautiful breast of the Malyavat hill for 4 months, duly worshipped by Sugriva all the while. Meanwhile Ravana, excited by lust, having reached his city of Lanka, placed Sita in an abode, resembling Nandana itself, within a forest of asokas that looked like an asylum of ascetics. And the large-eyed Sita passed her days there in distress, living on fruits and roots, practicing ascetic austerities with fasts, attired in ascetic garb, and waning thin day by day, thinking of her absent lord. And the king of the Rakshasas appointed many Rakshasa women armed with bearded darts and swords and lances and battle axes and maces and flaming brands, for guarding her. And some of these had 2 eyes, and some 3. And some had eyes on their foreheads. And some had long tongues and some had none. And some had 3 breasts and some had only 1 leg. And some had 3 matted braids on their heads, and some had only 1 eye. And these, and others of blazing eyes and hair stiff as the camels, stood beside Sita surrounding her day and night most watchfully. And those Pisacha women of frightful voice and terrible aspect always addressed that large-eyed lady in the harshest tones. And they said, Let us eat her up, let us mangle her, let us tear her into pieces, her that dwelleth here disregarding our Lord. And filled with grief at the separation from her lord, Sita drew a deep sigh and answered those Rakshasa women, saying, Reverend ladies, eat me up without delay. I have no desire to live without that husband of mine, of eyes like lotus leaves and locks wavy, and blue in hue. Truly I will, without food and without the least love of life, emaciate my limbs, like a she-snake hibernating within a thala tree. Know this for certain that I will never seek the protection of any other person than the descendant of Radhu. And knowing this, do what ye think fit. And hearing these words of hers, those Rakshasas with dissonant voice went to the king of the Rakshasas, for representing unto him all she had said. And when those Rakshasas had gone away, one of their number known by the name of Trijata, who was virtuous and agreeable in speech, began to console the princess of Vaidha. And she said, Listen, O Sita. I will tell thee something. O friend, believe in what I say. O thou of fair hips, cast off thy fears, and listen to what I say. There is an intelligent and old chief of the Rakshasas known by the name of Avindhya. He always seeketh Rama's good and hath told me these words for thy sake. Reassuring and cheering her, tell Sita in my name, saying, thy husband the mighty Rama is well and is waited upon by Lakshmana. And the blessed descendant of Raghu hath already made friends with Sugriva, the king of the monkeys, and is ready to act for thee. And, O timid lady, entertain thou no fear on account of Ravana, who is censured by the whole world for O daughter, thou art safe from him on account of Nalakuvara's curse. Indeed, this wretch had been cursed before for his having violated his daughter-in-law, Rambha. This lustful wretch is not able to violate any woman by force. Thy husband will soon come, protected by Sugriva and with the intelligent son of Sumitra in his train, and will soon take thee away hence. O lady, I have had a most terrible dream of evil omen, indicating the destruction of this wicked-minded wretch of Pulastya's race. This night wanderer of mean deeds is, indeed, most wicked and cruel. He inspired terror in all by the defects of his nature and the wickedness of his conduct. And deprived of his senses by fate, he challengeth the very gods. In my vision I have seen every indication of his downfall. I have seen the ten-headed, with his crown shaven and body besmeared with oil, sunk in mire, and the next moment dancing on a chariot drawn by mules. I have seen Kumbhakarna and others, perfectly naked and with crowns shaven, decked with red wreaths and unguents, and running towards the southern direction. Vibhishana alone, with umbrella over his head, and graced with a turban, and with body decked with white wreaths and unguents, I beheld ascending the summit of the white hill. And I saw 4 of his counsellors also, decked with white wreaths and unguents, ascending the summit of that hill along with him. All this bodeth that these alone will be saved from the impending terror. The whole earth with its oceans and seas will be enveloped with Rama's arrows. O lady, thy husband will fill the whole earth with his fame. I also saw Lakshmana, consuming all directions with his arrows and ascending on a heap of bones and drinking thereon honey and rice boiled in milk. And thou, O lady, hast been beheld by me running towards a northerly direction, weeping and covered with blood and protected by a tiger. And, O princess of Vaidha, soon wilt thou find happiness, being united, O Sita, with thy lord, that descendant of Raghu accompanied by his brother. Hearing these words of Trijatha, that girl with eyes like those of a young gazelle, once more began to entertain hopes of a union with her lord. And when at last those fierce and cruel Pisacha guards came back, they saw her sitting with Trijatha as before. Thus ends the 278th section in the Draupadi Harana Parva of the Vana Parva. If you enjoyed this audiobook, please like and subscribe to be notified of when new audiobooks are uploaded. Thank you for listening and learning. Shanti.